Now you know how to connect to Cisco switches and how to access the CLI, but you need to protect this CLI to make sure that only legitimate users or authorized users are allowed to access CLI and do changes in switch configuration. There are multiple ways to protect CLI access and multiple levels of privilege or authorization. First of all, we need to understand the naming of management interfaces. Cisco switches use the name line for management interfaces. So for console interface, the name in Cisco switch is line console 0, and for SSH or telnet interfaces, the name is VTY 0 to 15. Console means accessing the switch using console port, and SSH telnet are different ways to access the switch remotely using its IP address. You can protect enable mode by adding a password. This password can be added using enable command, but this is old and not encrypted by default, or enable secret, which is more secure. If you have enable and enable secret commands configured in the same switch, enable secret will override enable command, and enable command and enable password will not take effect. We will compare both commands in our lab and will discuss the difference between them. Enable password by default is not encrypted, and even if you encrypt it, this encryption is not strong enough. On the other side, enable secret uses hashing. This hashing is more secure and more difficult to crack, and that's why it is always suggested to use enable secret instead of enable in any new configuration. It is not enough to protect enable mode. It is not enough to protect enable mode, and in most cases, you should protect CLI access by another mechanism. The minimum level of security is using password. You can set a password on console port or on VTY ports, and in this case, anyone who wants to access these lines should type a password. This password is per line, and it is the same for all users, and that's why it is not considered as a strong way of authentication. The other thing is that password can be used for console and telnet, but not for SSH. If you are looking for a more secure way to protect CLI access from console, SSH, or telnet, you should consider username and password or credentials, which means each user connecting to the switch should have their own username and password or credentials, and based on these credentials, each user will get different privilege. Cisco switches have different privileges that range from 0 to 15. For user information, including username, passwords, and credentials, they can be stored locally in the switch. In this case, there is no need for any external server, but this is not scalable, and in many cases, more secure way is needed to authenticate these users. The other option is to store user information remotely, and in this case, protocols like TACACS or Radius can be used to authenticate users and to assign them to different privilege levels. To store user information remotely, external server will be needed, and in this course, we will discuss local username password only. For additional security, you can add access control lists into these lines to limit access to these lines from certain subnets. ACLs or access control lists will be discussed later in this course. Before starting our lab, let's talk a little bit about switch memory components and how configuration files and configuration changes are stored in switches. There are multiple components in switch memories, and in this course, we care mainly about these 4 components. When booting the switch starts from the ROM, which includes Bootstrap or Mini iOS to power up the switch and to start the operating system or iOS. This mode is identified by ROM1, and we will not discuss this mode in this course. ROM1 will start iOS software from the flash. This iOS software is the operating system that runs the switch. Cisco switch can have multiple iOS files in the flash, and you can upgrade from one iOS to another by uploading a new file into the flash. When it comes to configuration files, NVRAM or non-volatile RAM is the place where configuration is stored. There are 2 versions of switch configuration. Startup configuration, which is the switch load when booting for the first time. This configuration is stored in this memory, which is non-volatile, which means it is not affected when rebooting the switches or powering it off. The other version of configuration file is stored in RAM. This is called running configuration, which is used to run the switch in real time. When you do any changes in configuration, these changes are applied into running configuration, and after any modification in configuration, you should copy running configuration into startup configuration to make sure that these changes are permanent and they will not be lost when you reboot the switch. So after discussing management ports, console cables, console ports, and memory, we are ready to start our first lab. If you like this video and if you find it useful, please like, share, subscribe, and enable notification to receive future videos in my channel. Thank you and have a good day.